Welcome back. American Literature 1820 to 1865, Part 3. We're gonna finish it up this round. I can feel it. So, last time we left off, our fearless heroes were discussing reform movements that inspired American writers. So there's this new sense of human rights and advocacy that comes out uh, post-American Revolution, but is very much informed by Enlightenment ideals. And okay, this is way too many things at once. Let's hit them one at a time. So, first of all, women's rights. Um, Remember, suffrage, the right to vote is not given to women until 1920. Also, women were pretty much considered subordinates to men in all areas of the public sphere. Their ability to work outside of the home was very limited. Um, Women who did not marry often had to stay at the home of their father and were basically under the father's supervision. If they did get married, any wealth or land that a woman would inherit was immediately put under the possession of the husband. So we're talking about real second-class citizen status, and American writers picked up on that. Anti-slavery movement as well. The abolitionists also find their moment in this period and really ramp up their opposition to slavery in the Republic. Important to keep in mind that women's rights and abolitionist advocates had a lot of intersection. They were often on the same page politically and ideologically, and would sometimes reference how one of these advocacies is related to and is analogous as the other. So they help to support each other. And they do both tie into this idea of universal human rights. Also, the temperance movement. Now, the temperance movement is a very different kind of movement from the first two, but it stems out of, a very strong and, for the most part, accurate sense that alcohol was in some ways hurting the American Republic. Now, you've got to think about this. America is expanding, it's increasing in wealth. Individuals in America are increasing their wealth. And with that comes the increase in business of breweries and distilleries, and even, home brewing and distilling setups. Of course, quite a few Americans drank moderately, but there were those that, of course, drank to excess. And we have to remember at this time, the medical and psychological and physiological understanding of what addiction and alcoholism is really is not present yet. So people had no notion of how to address it except with a simple cut it off at the root. Don't drink. Get people who are drinking off of drinking any way possible. Now, this is a very extreme solution, but you do also have to remember that, because of the lack of understanding about the psychological and physiological dynamics of alcoholism and addiction in general, there were few other options at that point. And, refraining from alcohol has been a part of lots of different cultural and religious movements. You also have to keep in mind, too, that, because of this lack of understanding of how alcohol works, a person who was drinking heavily could suffer from loss of health, loss of livelihood, and also commit acts of violence against those that are even close to them. So it becomes a real community epidemic in some cases. There would be people that would get their week's wages, go straight to the pub and drink and drink and drink until it's all gone. And this obviously had a ripple effect around those who are loved ones. Coming up even further, Native Americans' rights. That really also syncs up with the first two elements, women's rights and anti-slavery. And again, as America expands and the population grows, Native Americans are being pushed out of their lands at an even greater rate, sometimes with signed treaties, oftentimes without them, or with treaties that are then rescinded or broken. Going back to women's rights, I hope a lot of you remember this image, and we looked at this at some of our earlier notes. And again, it's talking about the range of what was considered appropriate for a woman in her time. Keep within compass, and you shall be sure to avoid many troubles which others endure. And here we are. We've got the gambler, the drinker, the woman who likes to date. And how all these things lead to poverty and to ruin and dissolution. And keep within your compass is really an 18th century or 17th century way of saying, know your place, stay in your lane. And that place and that lane was a subordinate position, as we've already discussed. Now, here we have a flyer from the 1848 Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. And it was one of the most influential meetings for women's rights advocates at its time. And you have such notable early American feminists such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you'll see right there, and Lucretia Mott, who are also really important in this early movement. But you will also notice under the gentlemen being represented, Frederick Douglass, and also I didn't see where they put his name, but William Lloyd Garrison's also there. And so these are two abolitionists, activists too. And once again, we're beginning to see that intersectionality of advocates for equality for women and advocates for equality of people of all races here. So there's a real synergy going on. And come on, click it, dude. Of course, whenever there is a rise in awareness about egalitarianism and rights, there's going to be pushback from the social rear guard of society, and you certainly see it here. Here is a political cartoon called The Age of Iron, and the kicker about this one is that there's a bit of fear mongering going on in here. The whole idea that a woman would suddenly get up, get dressed for the town, and leave so that a man and perhaps an older son or a servant are staying at home mending and washing and taking care of a baby. And the fact that this works might strike us as a little bit absurd today, because I think we all know men who do share in the domestic work at home and, have no problem with their significant others going out and having, a good time. But again, this is the place where we have these very ossified gender roles. And again, once again, intersecting with that would be flyers and printings that help to publicize the human rights issue at the core of slavery. And here we have it say, we have in the scroll underneath, it's saying, "Am I not a man and a brother?" So printing was was really fundamental to the rise in awareness of these reform movements, and also the abolition movement. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a lot of you know, becomes a bestseller during the time and really helps to popularize the uh, the notion of, slavery being a violation of basic human rights. Now, you'll notice here that it's already boasting very high numbers. And the whole idea behind Uncle Tom's Cabin is that its popularity helped raise awareness in everybody's minds about the atrocities of slavery. It helped to portray African Americans in a way that was sympathetic and showed them as undeserving of this um, third or fourth level status. Interestingly, Uncle Tom's Cabin was the second best selling book in the 19th century. First best, number one best selling book in the 19th century, the Bible. So, right behind that guy. And Native American rights and advocacy is also very important during this age. We have a picture here, a painting here of Black Hawk, both in his native dress and also in westernized clothing as well. Black Hawk becomes a really important spokesperson for the Native Americans and for advocating for their fair treatment. Now, one of the core moments that helped to elevate Native American rights to the forefront in the 19th century was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And this idea challenged the sovereignty of Native Americans on their land and really helped push the issue to the forefront for a lot of writers of the time who were very much interested in the universal human rights issues as they should be applied to the sovereign Native American peoples. So, to think about the relationship of American writers, there's this synergy or cross influence or cross pollination that starts to happen among some of the most acclaimed writers of the time. And especially before the Civil War, the antebellum writers often had very robust correspondences with each other, bounced ideas off of each other, and often influenced each other just through virtue of their writing. Sedgwick writes Hope Leslie, and this is in a response to James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay The Poet has this huge rippling influence through Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, and Emily Dickinson. So we can start to see that poetic genealogy moving forward. Frederick Douglass's narrative becomes a very powerful foundational work for Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Herman Melville, in his introduction to Moby Dick, dedicates it to Nathaniel Hawthorne and his influence. And there are also these transatlantic influences. Even though America is starting to get this synergy going on here, there are ways in which Europe and the Old World is still influencing them. Washington Irving, the author of Sleepy Hollow, and also Rip Van Winkle, serves as a U.S. diplomat to Spain. James Fenimore Cooper lives in Europe for 7 years. Margaret Fuller, the important 19th century feminist, is part of the Roman Revolution of 1848 to break the monarchy and to start to develop a democracy. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was a U.S. consul in Liverpool and also lived in Europe for roughly 8 years or so.